everybody. Welcome back to the Crab Podcast. It is still October, which is Blindness Awareness Month, if you're not familiar with that. And we're going to take a little point of privilege and talk about what that means a little bit to me. And one of the things that not every blind person does, as we've talked about blindness being a spectrum, but something that's very unique to our family and a very small percentage of blind people. But I think it's something really cool to share. Welcome to the Crab Podcast. Here at Children Raised Around the Blind, we have two goals. Our first goal is to help those living with the blind to understand them better and to help children through the difficulties that come from living with a blind parent. Secondly, we want to spread awareness of the blind community. Here on the podcast, we will share the things that blind people can do and ways the sighted world can include them in everyday life. Join us twice a month to learn about the visually impaired community. Let's go ahead and jump right into our episode. We've talked about what it's like to be someone who may be blind or visually impaired. And, each person is going to deal with it differently. Just like you may see some people who have a white cane. There are some blind people who choose not to wear or to use a white cane. Some people are able to see better with glasses. Some may use sunglasses. Some may have nothing. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about something a little bit more unique, and that is those who have had their eyes removed. Some people have had it for various reasons. My mom had her first eye removed at 6 weeks old. It had a special type of growth in it. And so because of that growth, they had to remove the eye. And then she had glaucoma in the other eye. And by the time she was in college, the vision was pretty much gone. And the pressure from glaucoma was so severe that they decided to go ahead and remove that second eye. So she's actually she wore a glass eye growing up. And then when she did that surgery, she was in South Carolina and was able to get a set of eyes. And she gets them not polished too frequently, but she does go up there for polishing. And something kind of unique, I think, is I didn't realize that with the eyes, I thought that the person who makes the prosthetics actually goes through training and there's a college degree for that, and learned that no, this is actually a specialty that you learn from somebody else. So there are some people who offer prosthetic eyes and they go online and they just, I guess, order a set and they're pre-colored, pre-designed shape and all of that to an extent, and then that person may be able to go in and reform it if need be. Like for my mom, her right eye is sinking. That was the one that was removed the earliest, and so we had to go back 2 years ago now, and he actually had to take the eye that he just made and had to add some extra to it so that it fit in the socket correctly and wasn't sinking so that the eyelid closed. And it's a really cool and interesting process. But he learned it from someone who did it for veterans, which is where it came from. Was war veterans were coming home and not having their eyes anymore. They were damaged. And so they started to make prosthetic eyes for them. And then it ended up being something that they opened up to the general public. So I'm going to show you. Don't freak out. All it is some wax and then some really cool painting. So this is one of her older eyes. All it is a piece of basically a piece of wax. That's what they use, and that hardens and forms the shape of the eye that she needs. And then her guy hand paints all of these. So he does the pupil, the black part, the iris, your colored part, and then he also does the all the blood vessels. So like this one has a lot more. can show you, right? Has a lot more of the veining. So that's thread that he puts in. And then he can run a polish over. So my mom is on her, I thought it was her fourth. It's actually her fifth set. We kind of pick on her because we have always said there's four of us in the family, and we said once mom had enough pairs of eyes, she could pass away. Completely joking. Don't take us seriously. But we have it written in her will that everyone of the four kids gets a pair of her eyes because we want to do lots of puns because we think it's funny. Like, I told her I'm going to carry them around in my purse. And when people say, oh, you look like you have your mother's eyes, I'm be like, actually, would you like to see them? Because that's normal for us. We talk about it. We do things. So here's another set. And you can see the shape is very different. And so depending how it feels, she knows which way they go. With the new one, I think this was one of her older pairs here. They've had to add to it, like this one, versus this eye. They haven't had to add as much. So depending that to fit it, get it to fit comfortably. It's unique. We, growing up with our homeschool group, my mom would, I think it was about once a year, she would do a blind person demonstration. And in that, she would, we would demonstrate a couple different things. One was a cane, how she uses her cane, what to do, not to do. Like, don't think it's a jump rope and you can jump over it. Or see her coming and, move in different ways. Like, try to just stand still so she can find you. We did sighted guiding, so how you would lead her around if she was with you on an activity. We also did things that, like teaching Braille. We'd get them the Braille alphabet, and usually she'd go around and get their names and put their names underneath the alphabet so that they could read their names later. That was fun. We brought a Braille book, some Braille magazines, which most of that's all digital now, but she used to get like the Reader's Digest, which was 2 or 3 volumes in Braille, and a volume is probably like 2 to 3 inches thick. So it's a lot to read. I mean, if you've seen a Reader's Digest, it's the smaller half page size, but it's also small print. And even though it may be 100 pages, that's still going to be probably between 200, probably 150 to 200 in Braille. We would bring the kids' books, or we have print Braille books. And then one of the other things is she would take her eyes out. And it was interesting because a lot of the adults were like, couldn't handle seeing it. And a lot of the kids thought it was the coolest thing in the world that my mom could take her eyes out. And so there were times where they'd come up later and be like, hey, can your mom take her eyes out? And I'm like, hey, mom, you want to? And we'd get a tissue or paper towel, and she'd turn around so they couldn't see, and she'd pull it out, and they'd get to see it and what it looked like, and then she'd pop it back in. It was normal, okay? I realize now as an adult that's not normal. I mean, I kind of knew as a kid it may not be, but it was what it was. There were times where my mom would get infections called styes, and she would have to take them out for a couple days. And so seeing her walk around with her eyes actually closed, or even like they would be partially opened, was really weird because what's back there could scare you if you didn't know what you were looking at. If you think about a really, really bad scrape, maybe you were drug on the floor or went, gliding on the pavement outside, and you kind of have that rug burn, road rash scraping where it's kind of red and bloody looking, even if it's not very deep. That's kind of what it looks like. There's a little white spot in hers that's actually where they put a little ball behind her where the optic nerve is, because her optic nerves are still in there. It's not something that they remove. And so that little silicone ball moves around sometimes. We've actually had a couple doctor's appointments because it was up underneath. And they said for that, it's one of those things they can't really control. The muscles get relaxed. They're not moving around as much. And with age, they're just not going to hold up. And so we did one surgery to move it, and they said they probably wouldn't be able to do it again if it were to cause an issue. But yeah, walking around holding my mom's eyes. Apparently in school, she talks about in her book where she put her, so she had a glass eye originally, and she put it in a jar and put it on her desk and like treated it like a best friend and things like that. So not a lot of people have prosthetic eyes. I think some of it is a patch is easier potentially. You don't have to do fittings, you don't have to do cleanings. There's also less and less people to do it. So here in the Southeast, for somebody who actually makes them by hand, we only know one person, and when we were there talking to him, he's in South Carolina. He said he's getting referrals from 4 or 5 different states of people coming to him to get their eyes done, because there's less and less people who can do it. And so if that's a field that interests you, feel free to reach out to us and we can get you in contact with him. He trained under the man that originally did my mom's eyes in the 80s, and he's now passed away. But it's been really neat to see his skill level. He's in his mid 30s, and just really good. There's a couple different people on social media that I have followed who have prosthetic eyes. There's one gentleman that I follow, and he gets specialty eyes made, which can happen with different colors. I know when we were at her eye specialist last, he had a purple glittery eye, and I was like, "Hey, is that like a kid's eye?" Or, different people want different things. He goes, "Yeah, it was a younger kid that was going to be using it, and the child had chosen to embrace being different." And was like, "You know what? Everyone's going to be staring at me, and I can't, always see it and tell it. So why not just make it unique?" And so really just owning almost like that disability part and being like, who cares? So they're going to look at me anyway. So things like that these are my normals. I'm a weird oddball. I don't care anymore. But I do think, knowing that there are people who do have prosthetics, there are people whose eyes were underdeveloped, there are people who, as they lose their vision, it gets worse, especially people who have glaucoma. If the drops don't work and things like that, they do get like a glossy, like a film looking on their eye. All of that is normal, and for us to take that into consideration. I know everyone wants to either ask questions or maybe like, oh no, like I'm going to get it if I'm around them. Most of the things that cause eye disease or vision loss are not things that you can catch from somebody else. Although the number one leading cause for blindness in the United States is diabetes. So if you are diabetic, checking your levels, taking your insulin, taking care of your body is huge, because that eventually, especially with age, will also lead to this degenerative point where now you don't have vision. And so that is one of the things that we are very much aware of. And as somebody who works, volunteers, and stays in the blind community, we see those numbers growing, and there's such a resistance sometimes to doing things a blind person way. And I would say, if you're somebody listening to this podcast and you're starting to lose vision and you're like, well, I can still see, or I can still read print, you know what? Learn, because the day will come when you can't, and it might be too late. It may be too hard. The sayings, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can, but it's really, really hard. And so I think anyone who has any sort of vision problems that are degenerative or could potentially get worse over time, learn the Braille. I can't tell you the number of people I've met who have an eye disease, like macular degeneration, for example, or RP, and they don't want to learn Braille at first because they're like, well, I'm going to have my vision. I'm just going to use what I have. Well, then all of a sudden it slips away slowly. And now they're barely able to make anything out, and they have to learn how to use a screen reader on a computer. They have to learn how to navigate day-to-day activities without Braille, how to use, go to a public restaurant and do those types of things. How do you label your medications if you have multiple medications? There are things to do, but just so many things that we could help if we would be more on the preventative side or ahead of the game and just say, hey, this is a potential. So I'm going to go ahead and at least start learn some basics, learn the alphabet, learn bathroom signs, learn a screen reader, even if you can still see, so that when you do lose your vision, you have an alternative and you're not having to learn all of a sudden, because it can go quick and it can go slow, and being able to have those skills really helps. I'm going to get off my soapbox for the moment. I hope you guys have a great week. Halloween is around the corner this week. Coming up here soon. My kids are really excited. Since our town does something on the Saturday before, that's what we're doing. And everyone dressed up as superheroes. And so that's going to be really fun. I'll have a podcast about how to include a blind person in those types of social events, dropping as well here soon. So I hope you guys have a great week, and thanks for listening along.